Well, thank all of you for coming. I'm actually glad to see all of you, and I'll tell you why. Writing is a very solitary endeavor. I mean, you spend about the only time you get outside of staring at your computer screen is interviewing someone in some dark and dusty place. And then books go out on their own, like lost children. You don't actually get to see what readers think after they've read the book, or at least not very often. And sometimes you only hear from the people who are upset. So hopefully you're not upset, and I'm delighted you're here. So I always have envied both the stand-up comics and the actors. You know, they get the immediate response from the audience after their performance, and they don't even have to write their own lines. Well, when you're being hunted by American men 18 to 25 years old, it's almost inevitable that you're going to get a nickname, if not several nicknames. And Khalid Shaikh Mohammed very quickly became known inside the Special Forces community and inside the broader intelligence community as KSM. So that's how I'm going to refer to him, by his U.S. government nickname, if you will. But KSM also had another nickname inside Al-Qaeda. And because this story is so good, I'll tell it to you right up front. That nickname was KFC. And he got the name KFC because he ate buckets and buckets of Kentucky Fried Chicken, or Kentucky Fried Chicken knockoffs, in Pakistan. He's about a 5'4" man. He weighed about 140 pounds in college. But after 9/11, when he was in Karachi and other Pakistani cities, chowing down on KFC, he ballooned up to over 200 pounds. He had this Jabba the Hutt-like girth. And this led to a lot of teasing inside Al-Qaeda. They called him KFC, and he didn't like it. So when Wall Street Journal reporter Daniel Pearl was kidnapped by a man named Omar Sheikh, KSM arranged for that man to sell the captive, Daniel Pearl, to him. This is not as unusual as it sounds. Captives are sometimes bought and sold inside the terror network. And he brought a film crew to the home where Daniel Pearl was held. And once the camera was up on the tripod running, he leaped onto the right shoulder of Daniel Pearl and began sawing away at his neck. Now, I'm going to spare you the grisly details. It took about 11 minutes for Daniel Pearl, my former Wall Street Journal colleague, to die. But why did he do it? He did it because he hated the nickname KFC, in part. He wanted to show that even though he was fat, even though he was now in a senior leadership position, he could not only send people to kill and to die, but he could kill himself. He killed Daniel Pearl not because of anything Daniel Pearl said or wrote or even thought. He did it to change and affect his reputation inside Al-Qaeda. And that gives us a small window into the man, and I hope to open a few other windows as I talk briefly today. Now, inside Al-Qaeda, it's not as monolithic as you might imagine. I wrote the book Mastermind to really answer three questions. I mean, the old saying that you write a book when you want to spend a couple of years studying something, when you want to teach yourself something. So there are three questions as the war on terror sort of waged on that dogged me at the back of my mind. And these were the questions. One, how does an educated, successful person, someone educated in American or Western universities, become a remorseless killer of our society and of his own? What's that pattern of transformation? What are the choices that person makes to become a terrorist? How does that happen? Secondly, I wanted to know, how does Al-Qaeda function on the inside? What is it like to work for Al-Qaeda? What are the internal dynamics? And third, what techniques in the war on terror work and don't work? And that obviously leads us into the territory of interrogation, rendition, and what some people call torture. So those are the three things I'm going to talk to you about briefly today. Khalid Shaikh Mohammed is born in Kuwait, in a city called Fahayil. It's on the coast. His father came there in 1950, and it was never a very important, it was a village, and it became important in the 1950s briefly because of oil production. It attracted a lot of British and Australian and some American engineers, and it became a boom town. But before the coming of the Western engineers, it was a small coastal village where men dived bare-chested for pearls, sold seafood, It was an Arab seaside town. But with the oil boom, it started attracting immigrants from across the Muslim world. And the call of wealth, or possible wealth, from Fahil reached the mountains of Baluchistan, which is a region you won't find on many maps. But it's a country that no longer exists, but it goes into three different countries. It's a people that sprawls over three countries: Iran, Pakistan, and Afghanistan. And these people without a country migrated for money. Some of them were soldiers of fortune, but others were like his father, Khalid Shaikh Mohammed's father. They came looking to make money and to make a new life. But his father comes and very quickly is a merchant, a peddler, and becomes an imam, preaching a very radical version of Islam, which is more or less at this time unknown to the Baluch people, of which he was one. He encounters this ideology in Kuwait, most likely through Saudi sources, what people loosely call Wahhabism, which more properly is known as, the Salafis of Salafism. And this radical form of Islam in the 1950s and 1960s is immensely appealing in that section of Kuwait for two reasons. One, most of the residents there are not Kuwaitis, native Kuwaitis. They're displaced peoples. They're predominantly Palestinians, and the Palestinians have much of the lower professional jobs: school teachers, police officers, things like that. And then the other displaced peoples, Bangladeshis, from the war between India and Pakistan, Pakistanis looking for money, people from the Far East, predominantly Muslims, all who were able to come into Kuwait without a visa. But very shortly in his life, Khalid Shaikh Mohammed is about 4 years old at the time. His father dies, and I searched for the death records. Apparently his father died in 1969. And the Kuwaitis simply didn't keep records of resident foreigners, births, deaths, marriages. It just wasn't interesting to them. So we have this account of his father's death, but it's very sparse. There's really no official transcripts to back it up. His father dies, and there's no welfare state. There's no organized charity in Kuwait for foreigners at the time. So his mother takes the job of washing the bodies of the dead, female bodies of the dead, and preparing them for burial. It's a very low status, low income job, but it enables her to eke out a living. At the time, she has 9 children. Khalid Shaikh is the 4th male. Years pass on, and Khalid Shaikh is doing very well at school. He's a good student, somewhat bookish boy. And the family decides that they don't have any money at all, that they need to just back one son to get an education. And that one son, this is typical in Arab families of this period of time, would support the rest of them. And that son is Khalid Shaikh. And ultimately he applies to a school in North Carolina named Chowan. Now it's called Chowan University. At the time it was Chowan College. An historically Baptist school in Murfreesboro, North Carolina. And either the family has saved some money, or more likely, the Muslim Brotherhood of Kuwait has agreed to sponsor him. He had joined the Muslim Brotherhood after two of his older brothers had joined at age 16. So he arrives in America at roughly 18 years old, and he's unprepared for what he sees. I interviewed the man who picked him up at the airport outside of Virginia Beach, who drove him to Murfreesboro. And what he remembers, this is years later, but the memory that he remembers is Khalid Shaikh being surprised by what he saw. Firstly, he's surprised by the geography, the intense greenery. When you see trees in Kuwait, they're usually behind walls and they're privately owned. Here, there were just trees everywhere. But more surprising and more strange and more off-putting than the trees were the people and what they were doing. They were sitting in lawn chairs on their front lawn, visible from the road. They were grilling out, playing with their kids, taking a hose to the bushes outside the front window. But what surprised him was so much of American family life happening in public. And this is not the kind of thing that would happen in the Arab world. And the more time he spent in North Carolina, the more he was